Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Venture Stories with Village Global. I'm here today with two very special guests, Ilya Sukhar of Matrix and Alex Yaseen of Parabola. We're here to talk about Devsumer. First, introduce yourselves and how you got into the topic. Ilya?
Sure. So I'm a lifelong programmer, and my path to startups and investing and kind of the whole ecosystem that we're in is really through programming. And I've always just found amazing leverage and amazing satisfaction in building things for myself and for others. I think in my startup life, most notably, I started a company called Parse, which had, some Devsumer aspects to it before Devsumer was a thing. We were really trying to change the abstraction level for the average mobile developer to give them a platform and tools to express themselves and build great apps without getting into the weeds of reinventing the wheel. And most recently, I've been investing at a firm called Matrix, where I've invested in a number of companies that fit this world. One of them is Alex and Parabola.
Cool. Alex, why don't you talk about what Parabola is and how you started it?
Yeah, so I have kind of a joint finance and computer science background, and used to live in the world of strategy consulting, building crazy Excel models, and kind of came at this from the side of a lot of people kind of already these Devsumers, and they don't realize that they're just living in Excel doing this stuff. And so I got pretty passionate about the idea of how do we level people up, give them kind of a better level of abstraction to work more like an engineer, but be not having to be a computer science, background. Currently been working on Parabola, where we call this visual programming tool. It's all drag and drop, primarily for sales, marketing, operations people. And it really lets them be self-sufficient and do the types of things that otherwise would be, a software engineer kind of doing something for them, and all the kind of gross lead time and everything that comes with that.
Yeah. Why don't you guys further define what Devsumer is and what led to its rise?
Sure. We might have different definitions, so maybe I'll start. I'm a big fan of simple definitions. And for me, Devsumer is just typically a SaaS offering that makes people, typically knowledge workers, more productive in ways that more resemble generalist programming tools than, verticalized SaaS offerings that are specific to their role or to their industry or whatnot.
Sure. I guess I like to look at things a lot in analogies, and we have the prosumer world of photography and videography, and you kind of have YouTube, where past few years you have these YouTubers who have 20 million subscriber followings, and they're creating this like really crazy high quality content, and maybe podcasts actually now start to look somewhat similar. And it's kind of individuals or small teams just way out kicking their coverage and able to do kind of massively productive things. And the Devsumer category is kind of the same thing, but for knowledge work, of being able to kind of work with data or build things on top of existing data, or just kind of really kind of go wild with creativity, building things that previously couldn't be created.
Yeah. It's about giving people leverage that was pretty much inaccessible to folks that were not, engineers themselves, or weren't willing to spend the time and energy to get there.
And with Parse, you were sort of, earlier, even pre this category, Ilya, was it obvious that this was going to become a trend, or what sort of led to, its rise?
I'm not sure it was obvious. I think actually for a long time, anything that resembled, higher level abstraction programming tools was really not in vogue, and VCs didn't want to fund it even when we were going through things. I think a few things happened. One is, by and large, the productivity tools for knowledge workers have kind of stagnated outside of this trend, right? So you look at the sort of the standard suite. If you're starting a company, what tools do you pick up? Well, you probably pick up either G Suite or I guess it's called Office 365 now, and you have docs, spreadsheets, files. Now Slack and chat have kind of added to that suite, but by and large, that set of things has really been static for like 20 years now. The only thing that's happened is we went from client server to the web to mobile, and I think by and large the hunger for new productivity tools and the venture dollars and the attention have gone towards companies that have just been carrying those paradigms, those primitives, over from all these prior platforms to the newer platforms. I think that's tapped out, right? Mobile is now, I don't know what it is, 11 or 12 years in. there's only so much you can do with those primitives. And I think knowledge workers have absorbed them all. People are comfortable with Slack. People are comfortable with Dropbox. People are comfortable with, the cloud tools that they have. And combine that with the proliferation of just the vast amount of vertical SaaS things that people are using in their everyday jobs. What we're seeing is a hunger for more productivity, right? We're seeing the average knowledge worker thinking, okay, how do I string this all together? Or how do I get more out of this? I can't really be stuck in this world where docs and files and spreadsheets are my only tools to get things done. So I think that's a big part of it is now a lot of things have solidified. In some ways they've stagnated. And I think we've seen some breakouts, Airtable, Notion, these kinds of companies, which really started 5 or 6 years ago and were not super sexy back then. But the timing has worked out. And I think there's some interesting trends that I think Alex has been thinking about a lot of how this ties into like the more broad productivity narrative.
If you look maybe 10, 15 years ago, companies were just starting to pull in all their data into one place and a lot of data warehouses and data lakes. And there were all these kind of, the enterprise was all about how do I get all the data into one place. And maybe ETL tools kind of were necessary to do all this. And then maybe 5 to 10 years ago, companies started saying, hey, we've invested all of this in getting all of this data in one place. How do we do something with it? And so they kind of visualization tools started to be really popular. And you had all the BI tools and Tableau and Domo and Looker and whatever. And then maybe just the past few years, as kind of Ilya was mentioning with some of these other tools, companies have started realizing we actually need to do something, kind of not just see where our data is, but actually do stuff, take action. Most people today who can do that are software engineers or data scientists. And even like the Googles of the world can't hire enough of those people to do all of that work. And so somebody else kind of needs to be able to do it. And then I think in parallel, kind of from the individual tooling perspective, Ilya was talking about, individuals kind of understand very clearly where they fit on this like productivity leverage ladder, possibly. So you have low productivity leverage people doing maybe kind of knowledge workers or somewhere in the middle. You have really high productivity leverage people where it's maybe a software engineer, a data scientist is the pretty high extreme. And people kind of very viscerally and emotionally want to get up to that next level. And so they're kind of starting to realize, hey, like I actually want to be doing more than just using kind of flat files or whatever.
Yeah, like for a while we had these SaaS tools, both vertical and sort of the carryovers of the Office suite that were leveling people up, and people want to keep leveling up. It's just the tools haven't kept them going, right? And so engineers have been evolving and getting better and better abstractions and getting, more
productive.
More productive in so many ways. Every few years, there's like a big shift. Like React is this, massive movement, for example. That hasn't really happened for the average knowledge worker for a long time. And so I think this is the outpouring of that.
Yeah. And we talk a lot at Parabola about how a lot of that kind of the old school type of tool that I was talking about maybe doesn't have the highest belief in like the intelligence of the user, the self-sufficiency of the end user. It was designed to make the tool itself very easy to use and kind of foolproof, which has helped get people to the point that they're at now, which is great. And so super valuable that has happened. But we talk a lot about how as those users want to continue increasing their leverage and kind of getting more and more sophisticated, we actually believe that there's this deep amount of analytical capability and curiosity and creativity kind of locked away within everyone. And we're just kind of helping everybody realize that actually I am this person who can be self-sufficient and I do know what I'm talking about. I just need the ways to express myself in the right way.
Zooming out a little bit, how do you guys slice up the Devsumer market? Like if we were to make a mini market map orally, how would we present an image to the listener?
I'm generally not a fan of like super detailed market maps. So my conception of this ecosystem is somewhat simplified. I think there are a class of companies that are trying to take very high leverage concepts and technologies from the world of engineering and kind of collapse them together with sort of this traditional Office suite that I've talked about. So if you look at Airtable, one way to describe it is it's kind of this marriage between a spreadsheet and a database. And the fundamental power of it is any everyday person can now use their spreadsheet in a very detailed, programmatic way, extensible way. You can build a bunch of things on top of it. You can have different column types. You can have a million different views. It's just a better encapsulation of a lot of what people were already doing in spreadsheets. But spreadsheets were designed for, large scale calculation, right? For financial modeling, for lots of, actual number crunching, when really what people were using, or many people were using them for these days, it's just like organizing data, right? Collecting data, filtering data, whatnot. And so I think there's a broad category of companies that are, just trying to rethink those building blocks. So, Notion, my understanding of it is they've tried to collapse all of those things into one and make, docs, tables, files, all kinds of embeds, sort of these composable blocks that all sit on one canvas. And the canvas is very extensible and flowing and really nice to work with. To me, it's crazy that like Google Docs still by default has page breaks, right? Like page breaks are a relic of a past life and you can't really intermix those things. So I think, there's a class of companies like that, Airtable, Notion, Smartsheets, Coda, probably some others that'll come to mind. And then I think there's another category of companies that are trying to be the glue between some of these tools, that are trying to compose, at a higher level, between SaaS tools, between companies, between data types. One way to look at it, I guess, is maybe that prior category is new ways to collect and organize data. And I think what Parabola is doing, what Retool is doing, and what some others are doing is new ways to create and work with logic, right? Actual programmatic things that do stuff with all of this data locked up in all these places.
Yeah, and I think you can really compare it almost directly to the suite of tools or the types of things engineers do, because that's kind of what we're talking about, is bringing those types of things to non-technical people. And if you're an engineer building an app, you need to have a database. You need to have some way you're going to present all the stuff in like a view layer. If it's a website or if it's a mobile app, you need some amount of logic in between that's actually making stuff happen, and kind of like that's like the secret sauce of like an app is, right? It's like how the stuff actually happens in the middle. And so you can break those three pieces apart. And that's each of those kind of categories, I guess, is a really interesting opportunity for startups to provide tooling that gives everybody kind of the ability to build those building blocks. And then there's some really cool communities and websites that are starting to aggregate, hey, how do you take a few of these tools, put them together, and actually, as a marketing person, you can kind of like build a full stack application by stringing a few of these things together.
And how should people who are looking to either build companies in the space or invest in the space think about Devsumer products and companies in terms of what's emphasized or what's more important here that isn't there, or what's different?
I think to sufficiently have a non-technical person dip their toe in the water of doing some of this more technical stuff still requires that teaching them to believe in themselves. They can kind of think through this stuff and actually do it. And so I think over the course of the past 10, 20 years, people have really started to develop a bit of a different type of relationship with technology. If I get led around to this page, like the computer did this thing, and it's kind of this anthropomorphized antagonism maybe of working with the computer. And so I think to the one hand, any company trying to start in the space needs to know that's just a thing and figure out how to either educate consumers to not have that behavior or just work with it. So in Parabola, we kind of try to have this very hands-on direct manipulation feel where people can anthropomorphize things, and that's fine because it says, oh, like this step is doing this thing, and it actually looks like it's doing that thing. And that's helpful for people's mental model. And I think kind of on the other hand, to get end users comfortable, you also have a very high product bar, and you kind of have to be willing to get a very maybe almost scary level of polish into your product in order to get people to self-serve and adopt and actually kind of invest a few hours of their time in learning how to use the tool.
Yeah, I think that part is really key. When I think back to what we were doing at Parse, we were trying to really elevate the abstractions with which, at the end of the day, developers still were working with databases and compute and whatnot. And we felt like one of our advantages was we were able to kind of meet people in the middle where people were expressing higher level desires like, oh, I want a login screen on my app, or I want a high scores table in my game, or I want, some way to track something about a user, which is really not how engineers necessarily think about components. And so we were able to build higher level abstractions and meet them in the middle and sort of dress up a bunch of gnarly infrastructure in ways that was accessible to a wider array of engineers. And I think Devsumer takes that to the extreme. And so building a product where, for example, you're exposing a database, but it really looks like a spreadsheet and people don't really need to think about the differences and, all the nitty gritty. It's just really hard. And it's not the kind of thing you can build in, 3 to 6 months and just put it out there and people will pick up on it, because these are people who are expressing their needs in very high level ways, right? The type of person who benefits from Airtable or Parabola or whatnot often doesn't really know what they're looking for. And they have to kind of tinker and play around with it and see the leverage to be like, this is amazing. And so the aha moment is very powerful, but it's very hard to achieve. And so I think that the bar for, let's say, an MVP in this world is very high, which I think is a reframing to how I think people thought about startups 7-10 years ago, where it's like, yeah, just, raise a little bit of money, get like a very bare bones thing out there. I just don't think that works in this world.
How else should startups be thinking about go-to-market in this space?
I think it depends on what of those types of tools you're trying to capture and what the desired use cases at the end are. So if you are something like a retool who is helping companies build these admin dashboards, and I don't want to misrepresent their vision, but you kind of need buy-in on a company level to start using something like that to some extent. And so those go-to-markets inherently have to be, getting a whole company excited and onboarded with using a tool. I think there are other categories of tools that I would group us in with, where it kind of can be a single player game if it needs to be, and you can get a lot of value as an individual user using something, and it gets much more interesting as an entire company starts using it. But that can have a bit of a more self-serve, bottoms-up go-to-market, where you are kind of treating things a little bit more in a consumer perspective of, I'm empowering you to have these skills for the first time, and you can do this stuff without bothering your developer. And it's kind of a little bit more of an emotional, consumerish, I think, go-to-market in that case.
I think one thing I'd add to this is product marketing is super important in this category. And I'm not sure people have quite figured out all the right strategies. The thing to avoid, which I do see teams struggle with, is when you get some early users, it can be very tempting to be pulled in the directions they want to pull you in, because they're going to have some particular use case that happens to have fit your mental model. And to avoid, changing a roadmap in their direction, to avoid over-rotating on what they want, is really hard, because it's, you have early traction, they might be paying you something. But the reality is the power of these tools is how general they are, right? Like Excel is such a general thing, and it works in so many different ways, and it would have never gone there if it wasn't so flexible. And so kind of resisting the siren song of your early users being like, oh, this is really great for like pulling my marketing specific data and doing these marketing specific calculations. And so in the case of Parabola, there might be this temptation to build building blocks that are very specific to marketing or to particular use cases. And I think a lot of teams struggle with this, because you grow through maybe a year or two of not a lot of, inbound interest, and you get some pockets of it and there's some momentum, and it can be hard to avoid, over rotating on the ones that seem like a pattern when the real opportunity is to be a general tool.
Yeah, we've felt that pull very strongly. And I think a lot of credit goes to Ilya and kind of our existing team, who has been willing to kind of rally around our broader vision to fight that pull. And so the way we have fought that is just really, really laser focusing on the, like, if we really hit this general purpose, helps a user learning Parabola, gets like a brand new capability that they have kind of now learned, and they can apply this to any work that comes their way. Just how an engineer can take a programming language and they know they can solve any problem that comes their way, has really, I think been a way to rally around that vision and avoid getting pulled into the small kind of maybe the local maximums of types of products that we could build along the way. Another interesting way you can look at some of these go-to-markets is how you handle some of the monetization components of it. And I think it's, again, very similar to code. So there is a GitHub model where everything is free and you're giving stuff away. And that's really interesting as an end user who's creating stuff. There's a version of like companies that, Apple has app stores, and like that's a whole other model. And there's all kinds of interesting ways of like people who are building stuff have monetization. And then the company kind of has to decide, how do we want our users to use our tool? And then how does that monetization work? So we could be charging a company kind of like enterprise rates to deploy this within their company. We can have end users who are either paying us to then be able to build stuff and possibly sell it. So other kinds of configurations that are really interesting. But I think the space is extremely broad for creativity in monetization here, given the surface area of types of things that can be built.
Yeah. What does the future look like if some of these companies really work? How big can this get?
So we obviously get a little on our high horse about how big this can get at Parabola, but I think the larger narrative I would tell is this productivity leverage spectrum I was talking about really looks like a productivity inequality gap. And you have kind of a lot of common narrative at the moment is the income inequality gap. But I personally believe if you redistributed, all the income tomorrow, within a few months, you would start to see it really kind of start separating again. And the problem is it's the amount of people in the world who are extremely high leverage and high productivity is very minimal. And you can't just buy them with money. And the kind of unfortunate result of that is that your canonical, Google engineer, working whatever hours they work is able to get an extreme order of magnitude of work done versus someone working in a non-technical field could work a lot more hours, work much harder, mean better, but just not be able to have the same amount of kind of like economic output. And that really sucks. And I think that's really, people find that very unfair on like a personal level. And so I think the opportunity here is how do we get similar to what every other turning point in history of kind of productivity leverages, whether it's the industrial revolution or the agricultural revolution, the new technologies came along that helped everybody else flex up and increase their productivity leverage to meet the people at the top. And I think it's very important that that happened this time rather than getting into this kind of like dual class of like person where one small group of people is highly productive and everybody else kind of struggles to keep up.
Yeah, looping back to kind of our earlier discussion, it would be a shame if we plateaued in sort of the leverage that people were getting from technology in their workplaces, whether they're in a very tech-enabled ecosystem or they're in a traditional company. It would be a huge shame if, that was limited to docs, spreadsheets, chat, whatnot. And I think the opportunity for doing even anything somewhat successful is massive, right? You look at Slack, right? It's entered this, it's sort of a default component of the sort of starter pack for knowledge workers, obviously doing amazingly well. So I think even if you get to sort of orders of magnitude of that, you end up with a lot of impact, and there's kind of no telling how much room there is in the cracks between these things. I had an interesting personal encounter with kind of thinking about this. My wife runs a very non-technology focused company, a very traditional company, kind of classic American industrial company. And I was looking over her shoulder the other day and I was like, man, she's using like Microsoft Word 2007, Microsoft Outlook 2007, Microsoft Excel 2007. And I was like, well, like you got to upgrade. Like this is ridiculous. And I kind of made fun of her for it, gave her a hard
look bad.
Yeah, giving her a hard time about it. And then a couple hours later, I was really thinking about it. I was like, you know what? This is a real shame. This is a real opportunity because yes, I mean, they probably should upgrade. It'll be better for their security. It might be cheaper. It'll be certainly easier to maintain. But at the end of the day, if you look at what Microsoft Word, 2019 or whatever, like Office 365 that is offered today, it's like, what is that going to do for their company that they couldn't do before? Nothing really, right? It's just going to be a little bit easier to work with. But she does a lot of spreadsheet work. There's actually a surprising amount of data in their world, but they don't think about it this way. If somehow their classic American company, the people in their office doing kind of the paperwork and the accounting and the, operations could use a tool like Parabola one day, that's like a whole new class of leverage. My wife's not a programmer. No one in her office is a programmer. They're never going to be programmers. They definitely understand spreadsheets. But what if they could understand these other tools and work in a different way? That's just going to unlock a ton of productivity, and it's going to make our society more productive. I can't put a dollar figure on it, but I think it's high.
I'd frame maybe in like one more like thought exercise. If you any given company, if you make stuff that you sell at like Home Depot or something, maybe like tools, I don't know, and that company got given 20 engineers from Google to come in and just do anything they wanted to do, they could turn into all kinds of interesting things. So many of these kind of interesting direct-to-consumer companies or a lot of the new startups are really just taking existing business models and adding technology to them and having these breakaway successes in other categories. And really the only difference is, do I have technical talent and people who understand technology or not at my company? And if all of a sudden every company and every person could kind of have that same experience, I think we're talking like huge economic change.
I think the hiring market for engineers is actually like a perfect proxy for thinking about the opportunity here, which is like, yes, technology companies in Silicon Valley have a very hard time competing with Google, Facebook, Apple, whatnot. But imagine the breadth of other companies that could never dream of even thinking about hiring someone with that amount of leverage. How can we give them just some, even fraction of that leverage across their entire knowledge worker population? That's just a huge opportunity. So that's how I think about it.
Zooming out, Ilya, you invested in Parabola a few years ago and have been excited about this category from the beginning. So before it was hot, how is the category viewed today by the venture community, and how has that evolved over time?
Oh, I've been very surprised by the heat in the last, even few months. I think there's just been some breakouts in the category that have changed people's minds about, what's possible here. And so I've been surprised, I guess. It is getting more popular. I think the the question is whether that endures, and the question is whether the people who are throwing money at this stuff really understand it. To some extent, I think, like in many engineering heavy categories, there is a disconnect between what the venture community thinks they understand about these tools and about these products, and what the tools and products really are fundamentally doing, and where I think they will be going. So that said, I've been surprised. There's a lot of excitement.
I would argue some of the interesting kind of macroeconomic trends could point to where some of this excitement is coming from, where at risk of taking this in too kind of wild of a direction, some of the kind of really unfortunate socioeconomic interactions that happen right now, whether that's rise of kind of interesting versions of populism or other types of things around the world, I think are really fundamentally people realizing I am not at the place on this productivity leverage ladder that I want to be. And that just kind of feels gross to a lot of people. And
are Donald Trump and Devsumer more related than I thought?
Yeah, I kind of think actually, right? And Donald Trump or Brexit or kind of any of those types of things are kind of the people who are lower on the ladder there saying I shouldn't have to be lower because I'm a valid person too. And that's totally true. I think the solution is, of course, helping bring those people up rather than pulling everybody down. So we want to be the like good version of how do we solve this problem. But I think in many ways you could actually look at that as a perfect case for why this has heated up. Is it clearly societally we're like approaching a breaking point where something has to happen.
Yeah. Why did we all miss, or what did we miss in Notion or Airtable? What did the venture community sort of miss, or why was that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if they missed, right? There are investors in both companies that are very happy to be those investors. I think, yeah, looping back to kind of what's different about this category, I just think these products take time, right? It just takes time to build a good enough product that, you know, statistically the average person who might stumble upon it in any number of ways is going to get that aha moment in, I don't know, the first hour that they use the tool and then stick with it. It just takes a long time to reach that bar. And so I think those products, just like, you know, a lot of things, right? They feel like these massive things that came out of nowhere, but you know, these are 5 or 6 year old companies and these guys were toiling away at it. The other interesting thing about both of them, at least in my mind, I don't know if other people feel this way, but I find both to be hard to describe in a simple, like one or two sentence way.
What is the aha moment? Because I don't know I just love the product, but I don't know what about it.
That's a very, like, I think if you looked back at a lot of successful startups in other categories, they're like fairly easy to explain once they got popular. But I think even today, for me, it's very hard to tell someone, hey, you should try out Airtable, you should try out Notion. It's this, and that very quickly, and they're going to get it. I kind of have to like give them an almost underwhelming description, which is like, yeah, it's kind of like a database. It's kind of like a spreadsheet. Just like try to organize some of your data. You're going to find something really interesting there. Or like Notion, it's like, well, you know, it's kind of like all the other tools, but it all fits together so nicely. And they have like, there's a lot of craft, and they care about this like feeling of people organizing their own spaces. I don't actually know the team, so I hope I'm not speaking wrongly about their philosophy, but I don't know that the venture community got it wrong, but I don't know that the venture community foresaw how big these things would be, and certainly didn't appreciate how long it would take.
So given it's kind of our business to do so, we definitely dive pretty deep into what is that aha moment and how do you deliver that. And I think I agree that it's very difficult to describe these tools where a lot of other types of software, there's some like obvious ROI where it's like, hey, use our thing and you can either save a bit of money or you can do a little bit more stuff. And it's like very clear to like make an equation in somebody's head of why I should do this and pay for it. The dopamine rush of like kind of what we're building is where the aha moment comes. And to explain that, when somebody who never was able to build something on their own really, all of a sudden build something that works, and they built something and then they can just like run it and see something happen. I can pull in like 3 different data sources. I can apply all kinds of interesting logic that previously was in my head and now is like out of my head. And I can just take action on its own. And I just built this autonomous like thing that does stuff. Is this crazy dopamine rush for people to the point where they'll message us on intercom and just like show us the stuff they're building because they just want to tell somebody about it. And like in a sense, shouldn't be that surprising because, so in the consulting world, I saw this all the time when people would build fun little spreadsheets. So people would make, or maybe they're not fun to anybody other than a consultant, but people would make, like spreadsheets to track how close they were getting status on United or something, and like what the most efficient like extra flights they could get were to like get platinum status and all the stupid stuff that comes with that. And people just get really proud of the stuff they're able to build. And it's just such an immediate feedback loop that as soon as you get someone to have that dopamine rush for the first time, that's kind of the aha moment.
Yeah. And I think kind of looping back, I think that makes a ton of sense because the thing that I found so addictive about programming, and I think what people who, love programming love about it, is this amazing feedback loop. And like you like write some code, you compile, and suddenly it works when it didn't work before. And now you've like built a thing that will endure, and you can kind of very incrementally build on top of it. I think a lot of these tools, the ones that work, they give you that sense pretty early where like you arrange some things or you put some data in here and suddenly like you can view it in a particular way, or you can combine two sets of data very quickly. And suddenly you get addicted to this like iterative process that doesn't really exist in other productivity categories, right? When you're just writing a doc, you're not like, oh, cool, I got one sentence. What would it be like to have two sentences, right? It's just like, okay, you know what that's going to feel like. Having a bit of logic and then thinking, oh, what could I add here? That's a very empowering feeling.
Yeah. Said differently, like, what does it feel like to be a creator for the first time? Like, that is just amazing to me.
Yeah,
for sure.
Sort of a closing question. Let's pretend that we were all the same venture fund and focus on investing in this category. You're looking in the future, where would we be most excited to invest, or what would our sort of requests for startups be? Where do we want to see people experimenting? Where's the next Airtable or Notion or Parabola going to come from? What sort of emerging opportunities or white space? If we're here, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, what existed at scale that didn't exist today?
Interesting. Just to some extent, again, I would point an analogy to the world of programming and tools for software developers. And maybe you could kind of look at new tooling and new levels of abstraction that are available to engineers are what we really want to deliver to consumers like 5 years later. And so like Ilya was talking about React being really great for engineers right now. And you can build really native, awesome feeling websites if you use some of the best new JavaScript frameworks. And maybe one interesting opportunity is kind of doing the same thing, but for letting people finally build like real front ends that feel awesome and feel native without having to code.
Yeah, I think there's probably going to be an interesting confluence of some of these Devsumer tools with the other developer world trend of static site generators and front-end heavy single-page apps. I think both are trying to collapse a lot of complexity and push the stack into like one manageable set of abstractions. And so maybe this bleeds over to more dev tools than Devsumer, but I would be looking at places that are companies rather that are working on basically what's the next generation, Wix, Weebly, Squarespace, whatever. Those have obviously been massive successes, and there's a bunch of small businesses and companies enabled by those products. But fundamentally, they're kind of limited, right? And they are not evolving super quickly. Whereas the power available to a real like engineer building everything from scratch is evolving quickly. And so I would look at the confluence of, okay, you take Airtable, that's a database. You take Parabola, that's kind of a runtime. Okay, what's the view layer of this stack, right? What is going to let people organize and express their data and their logic to like, their consumers, so to speak, in creative, powerful ways, maybe combined with React, maybe combined with things like Gatsby. I think there's something interesting there.
How should we think about the intersection of Devsumer and dev tools looking out in the future in terms of both of their growth and opportunities?
We look at that as, I think, increasingly overlapping. So if you think of programming languages as having evolved from 30 years ago, you had to like literally have a PhD and understand how to write machine code or something, assembly language, whatever. It was like it was kind of very difficult, maybe more than 30 years ago. And now you have JavaScript and all these fun frameworks, and you can kind of do a coding boot camp and actually be productive after 3 months of learning how to code. We're kind of just laying new levels of abstraction on top of that. Parabola, I think, starts to kind of bridge those two worlds where internally our engineers obviously are dogfooding the product, but they actually can build something more efficiently in Parabola than they could with code. If I'm doing kind of some interesting marketing analysis or trying to just do like something that's a little more complicated than I could do ad hoc in Google Analytics, and I need to write a little bit of a script to map some data and apply a little bit of custom logic. Still way easier to do that in Parabola than to write code, even if I know how to code. And so I think there's an interesting area of overlap between dev tools and Devsumer tools.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. I can still write code pretty easily, but there's just a lot of things I pick up Parabola for that, before I'd write a script from scratch. So I think one interesting intersection here that I've observed over the last say 5 or 6 years in just the pure developer ecosystem is we've moved from a world where Rails and other kind of all-encompassing frameworks were dominant. right? And so you picked, Rails or Django or any number of these kind of top to bottom packages of software and architecture. And you were like, okay, I'm going to do it this way. And, Rails had this omakase concept of like, you take it all at once and it's a particular way. Everything works well nicely, together to a JavaScript dominant world. And JavaScript is amazing. And there's been a lot of innovation there, a lot of, React led innovation. But, one thing I find when I dive into programming these days is like, I spend a day or two per project just picking the like combinatorial, set of tools I'm going to use. And it's really sliced very thinly, right? It's like, you're assembling the sushi like yourself because like you're picking the particular strain of rice. You're picking, you're slicing the fish yourself. You're like, I just want to eat a meal, right? And so to me, this feels like both an advancement and a regression. When I think about what we were trying to do with Parse is like we were trying to build this all-encompassing little universe that was still powerful, but by default worked really nicely together and just kind of steered you along a path of simplicity. And I think the last 5 or 6 years of dev tools have exploded complexity. They're very powerful abstractions, but they've kind of exploded complexity. And I think Devsumer might be kind of a counterbalancing factor to it, which is we're suddenly going to have all of these nice, consumery tools that developers might see the power of and realize, okay, for a lot of tasks, maybe I should just pick up one of those, or maybe my developer tools need to be a little bit simpler, a little bit less burdensome for the user in terms of the mental overhead of just getting started, right? I think dev tools exist on the spectrum of power and simplicity, as well as like how much of that is upfront versus enduring. And I think we're in a kind of a weird place from my perspective right now with dev tools, and maybe Devsumer will be a force that will pull things in a better direction from my perspective.
I think we really resonate strongly with this, where if you're thinking about learning how to code, or you just have learned how to code, you should be able to be really productive with a small amount of kind of learning there. You shouldn't have to spend 4 years working at a tech company every week, spending 20% of your time kind of overhead, just staying fresh on all the latest changes and updates, and kind of, as Ilya was describing, becoming like a sushi chef. Like a home cook should be able to do a lot of stuff as well. And maybe there's still a world for sushi chefs. You still want like the high end experience occasionally, but it's great to be able to be kind of productive without kind of always having to go to this far extreme elite version.
Yeah. This has been Ilya Sukhar of Matrix and Alex Yaseen of Parabola. Guys, it's been a fantastic episode. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. That was so much fun.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Please hit us up at villageglobal.vc/network catalyst.